We begin with breaking news in our politics lead. Brand new CNN polls revealing how Americans feel about President Donald Trump's time in office. This in the wake of the 1-2 punch to his presidency, the Bob Woodward book, Fear, and the New York Times op-ed penned by an unnamed senior member of his own administration. President Trump's approval rating has now fallen 6 points in just the last month to just 36% approving of the way President Trump is handling his job. The president's favorability rating, a measure of whether people like him or not, has also taken a hit. 61% now say they have an unfavorable view of the president. That is the worst level since Trump was elected. And when it comes to that bombshell New York Times op-ed, a majority, that is 58%, say the author should publicly identify themselves. And 55% think it is appropriate, or rather inappropriate, for an administration official to work against the agenda of the president. This afternoon, White House staffers cleaned off the press secretary's forum before Sarah Sanders held the first briefing in nearly 3 weeks, 19 days. Sanders this afternoon doubling down on the president's request that the Department of Justice investigate who wrote the anonymous op-ed, and wouldn't rule out the possibility the president potentially suing Bob Woodward over his new book. Let's go right now to the panel. Let's start with these numbers here. Dave Urban, you look at these figures, they're not good for the president. I mean, look at independents there, too. So just among independents, down 16 points since August to 31%. We're heading into an important midterm election. How should the president be viewing these numbers?
Look, good thing the president's not on the ballot, right?
But is he not in the midterms?
He's not really on the ballot, right? No, he's really not on the ballot. Look, historically,
the trend is not good.
Yeah. The trend is not good, right? George Bush, in his midterm election, not the first go round, right? The second go round, his numbers were terrible, and he ended up losing both the House and Senate. So there is reason to be worried, rightfully so. But look, these elections are all about who's on the ticket actually, right? If you have good candidates in Florida, you have a tough race at the top of the ticket and a different race for Senate. So every race has to be viewed independently of one another, and the president's going to have some impact on some races negatively and some positively. Look, Senator Cruz, Ted Cruz, is begging President Trump to come to Texas for him. And so in Texas, he's going to get a good bounce. In West Virginia, I know that at the Attorney General Morsi, they would love the president to come in as much as he can to West Virginia. So,
Angela, Kristen,
yeah. Well, I think
you might call that a little spin, if I can.
Just a tiny bit. Just turn his tails around here. No, but I think what's interesting is you're absolutely right. The president will have some positive impact on some of the races, and on so many others, not so much. Especially when they're not even Trump-light, they're just baby Trump, which is the case in the situation you brought up in Florida. That is actually not a good example, because Ron DeSantis, just like the president, started his campaign trafficking and racism, and we saw how that continues to play out, just Exhibit A, those poll numbers. So I think that he has to be very careful about the negative impacts he might have for candidates who you all would support. For us, I hope they continue down this same trend, because for us, Simone, it means that there are people who get a historic opportunity, and this election is one of them, with 3 black gubernatorial candidates.
Well, Kristen and Simone, I want to hear from you on this. If you look at the generic ballot in the race, that's not trending well for Republicans either. I mean, it's safe to say that the president's disapproval, and this is despite the fact you have very good economic numbers, but that this makes, I assume, Republican candidates nervous.
That's right. So if you went back to last winter, in November, December, you saw numbers like this. It was scary for Republicans. And then the tax reform bill passed, which people will debate whether it's popular or not. But what is a fact is that the president's numbers and the generic ballot started to get better in the early part of this year.
Absolutely.
They'd been in a much better place for the last 7 months. Since August, the numbers have been trending the wrong direction for the president. I think it's because he's not on that message of the economy. Mm-hmm. In this poll, his economic job approval is about 13 points higher than his overall job approval numbers. 2/3 think the economy is in a good place, but that's not what the president seems to be talking about. And so if I was one of his advisors, I would suggest to him, get back to that if you want those numbers
well,
to
they tried today from the White House podium, Simone.
Well, I know the president was talking about the economy today, actually, on Twitter, but he was lying about the numbers.
Right.
So the fact of the matter is, it doesn't work if the president talks about the economy and then he lies. I also think that, well, come on now, Dave.
Listen, you sound like President Obama. President Obama criticizing the president.
Thank you so much.
Listen, criticizing this president.
I also think it's important to note that those numbers are going down. I think it's also because the tax cuts were tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, not everyday regular people, if you will. And so while, yes, GDP is up, wages are still flat and declining in some places. And folks are feeling that going to the polls. For Democrats, I think that's why it's important to continue to hammer this economic message in health care going into the midterm elections. That's what they have been doing. And these numbers don't look like a red wave, David. Don't look like a red wave.